Hello, everybody. It's 9:30 a.m. here in Vancouver, so let's begin. My name's Shane from the Faculty of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies here at UBC Vancouver, and it's great to be able to welcome you to this webinar today from the Faculty of Forestry on the Master of Sustainable Forest Management. Thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for letting us know where you're listening from. I can see we've got people here from Kamloops, Connecticut, Maryland in the US, Regina, Victoria, Moscow, Idaho. Amazing. So wherever you're listening from, it's a really warm welcome from us. Thanks for joining today's session. Before we dive in and talk more, I do just want to take a moment to acknowledge that we're broadcasting today from the traditional, ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. The Musqueam are one of the First Nations of Canada, and it's on their land where UBC Vancouver is now located. And what I would encourage you to do, I know you're doing your research at the moment and learning more about our programs and also learning more about UBC, but I'd also encourage you to learn more about the history of the lands where UBC Vancouver is located, and particularly the history of the Musqueam. And I'll post a couple of links into the chat shortly to help you get started with that if you haven't already. A really great way to feel more connected to a place and to the land is to understand its history. So I'd encourage you, as part of your research into UBC, to research the history as well. Before we talk more about the MSFM program, I do just want to tell you a little bit about UBC. First of all, thanks for considering UBC for your graduate studies. UBC has a lot of great reasons, a lot of great reasons to study at the graduate level. Probably first amongst those is the fact that it really is one of the top universities globally. It's often ranked as one of the top 20 public universities in the world, and it's considered a real research powerhouse. UBC attracts a lot of research funding. So in the last academic year, we attracted over 773 million Canadian dollars in research funding, which came from government, nonprofit, from industry. And that really powers the generation of new knowledge, of new ideas. And the same faculty members, the same professors that are doing that research are also teaching in our professional programs. So you'll be joining a really globally recognized community, a really strong graduate community. And the research that's happening at UBC is around a wide variety of different areas, everywhere from advanced materials to brain health, to culture and diversity, to business, the environment, genomics, global solutions, heart and lung research. There's such a wide variety of different research and knowledge being generated at UBC Vancouver. So it's a really great place to be, a really great community to be a part of for your graduate studies. UBC has well over 300 different graduate program options, and they range across 11 different faculties. And I'll just tell you a little bit more actually about the graduate school community, because we have over 11,400 graduate students at UBC Vancouver. Around 38% of these are international students, and they come from a wide variety of different countries. So just to really emphasize that point, that you'll be coming to become part of this program, you'll be part of the programs community, part of the community at the Faculty of Forestry, but also part of a very dynamic graduate community at UBC Vancouver. The Faculty of Forestry itself is ranked as one of the top 3 forestry schools in the world. We really do have a world-class teaching team here at UBC's Faculty of Forestry. So you'll be learning from some of the most innovative minds in the profession. We have 2 research forests we have the Alex Fraser and Malcolm Knapp Research Forests. And we also have this really amazing building on UBC Vancouver's campus, which is the Forest Sciences Centre. So this is where you'll be learning. And it actually feels like you're in a forest when you're in the main atrium, when you're in the main entrance into the building. So it's a really great space and a really great community to be a part of. So that's a really quick introduction into UBC and the Faculty of Forestry. Before I pass it over to Ken, I will just say that you can pose us questions today. So if you do have any questions, let us know by posting them into the Q&A. So I'm going to turn the chat off soon, but if you post your questions into the Q&A, we'll answer them. And also you can upvote questions in there. So if you see a question that someone's posted and you want to hear the answer to that one, make sure that you upvote it in the Q&A tab. Okay, so let me pass it over now to Ken.
Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to everybody who's joining us from the East Coast. I noticed there was some people from Connecticut and Maryland, so welcome, and welcome those from BC and Saskatchewan as well. My name is Ken Byrne. I'm the lecturer and coordinator for the MSFM program, so I try to keep everything running smoothly in terms of the topic areas and the courses and how they fit together. So the MSFM program is a 9-month course-based master's program. It is a very intensive 9 months, but I assure you it does go by quickly, and there's lots of support here to help you through it. We begin in August. In person in August, actually, the coursework can start with some pre-reading in July, or it actually does start with some pre-reading at the beginning of July. And then you come here to UBC campus in August, the second to last week of August, and we spend a week in Vancouver and a week out in Nelson, which is in the southeastern corner of BC. It's an area of huge diversity, geographic terrain diversity, forest diversity, and professional diversity. There's a lot of very experienced people who like to come and live there at the end of their forestry careers, and so you get the benefit of meeting a lot of very advanced people in their fields. There are 2 paths for completing the program. The graduation requirements are completed in either 10 or 22 months. Most students do choose the 10 months from July till April. And actually this year is the first year that we've had a student who has chosen the 22-month option, which basically means they go through the first term and then take a leave of absence until the following January and complete their program in that following January. Next slide, please. So what will you learn? Well, I mentioned a little bit about the real world experience, getting out there on the land in Nelson. That's the introductory course. In the term 1, we do a site level forest land management course, and it is centered around a capstone project where you develop a site level plan. And it's a practical exercise where we go out and we collect all the ecological data for a block that is actually going to be harvested. So you plan out the harvesting, the regeneration, the ecological assessment, what are the other values, visual quality, First Nations, wildlife, and the list goes on. You integrate and synthesize that quantitative data that you collect out in the field and turn it into an actionable plan. There are a lot of other courses in that first term that are used to support you. There's in the first term, there's a forest policy, data acquisition and analysis, and advanced geomatics. That's an increasingly important skill that foresters need. And we do keep in touch with our advisory team. We have an MSFM advisory committee, which is made up of a number of high-level professionals in the field to ensure that our program content remains current. We use models and tools to affect solutions that we implement in our plans. And at the end of the day, the course is, or the program is accredited to become a registered professional forester. I should mention I'm a registered professional forester myself. My background is in applied research, although I did my master's and PhD in natural disturbance modeling. Next slide, please. So this is, I believe the top left corner is a picture of one of our blocks. I think it was last year's block actually that we did our layout and planning for the site plan block. And in the bottom, the two pictures in the top right and the bottom left are older pictures, but I know that the one in the bottom right is a group of our students from last year. And you can actually, well, it's a little bit shadowy, but the block that they worked on is in the background on the other side of the lake. Next slide, please. So career opportunities. So as a graduate, I mentioned that it is, the program is accredited with the CFAB, so the Canadian Forestry Accreditation Board. And we also successfully renewed our certification or accreditation with the Society of American Foresters for becoming a certified forester. So your time in the program actually counts as time to become either a certified forester in the States or a registered professional forester in Canada. You require, Canada has a slightly different system where you go through a series of 6 modules. You need 2 years of industry, or rather work experience as a forester. It doesn't necessarily have to be industry. There are a lot of other organizations that employ foresters. Last year we had, for example, 5 of our class ended up doing urban forestry positions. Another does more ecological restoration back east. And of course there is the whole range of forestry professional positions with consultants, industry, and government. Here in BC, we have an excellent program through BCTS, the Forest Technologist Enhancement Training Program. Anyway, it's an apprenticeship program with the BC Timber Sales, and I know for a fact that at least one of my students this year has gotten a position with them. So, so the success rate for employment coming out of the program is very good. Everybody who's been wanting a job in forestry has managed to find one. Next slide, please. So I mentioned a little bit about the pathways. Both pathways are full-time registration. The first option is you begin with your pre-readings in July, you go to the summer course in August, continue with fall courses in term 1, which goes from September to December, continue on in January, and then we'll be finished in about mid-April this year. This option is, the best option who want to complete the program in a concentrated period of time. One of the advantages of the program is that you don't have as much opportunity cost in terms of time lost working. Next slide, please. The second option, graduation requirements are completed in 22 months. This option is best for students who are limited in the time in which they can be away from their employment or family obligations. It allows the first half of the degree to be completed. So that would be the from July, August, the term 1 ending in December, and then you would take 1 year off and then come back the following January and complete the program in the following year. Next slide, please. So general admission requirements, academic background, specific to the program. Ideally, candidates for the program will have some sort of maybe a non-credited science degree in biology, ecology, environmental sciences. This year we have We have some engineers, we have school teachers, and we do accept students from other undergraduate programs, but there are some basic minimum courses that you need to have in your transcripts, such as ecology, biology, some kind of a science, either chemistry, physics, earth science, certainly statistics, in order to get into the program. The academic requirements are a B+ range or higher in your senior level courses. For international students, there's an English language proficiency requirement, and the deadline is on March 15th of this year. Next slide, please. So how to apply? So completing the online application and paying the application fee, provide your scanned copies of official transcripts for all your post-secondary institutions, your 3 referees with 1 academic reference is required. You also need to submit a letter of intent and a CV. So all of these, including the academic, you need at least the minimum academic requirements, but we're not necessarily looking for, ranking it by top grades, like, okay, I only take the 95% average people first and then the 90%. It doesn't really work that way. We consider your past work experience, your references, and that letter of intent is really important because this is a really intensive program. It requires a large commitment. So, we do place a lot of importance on that letter of intent to see how committed you are to the program. Next slide, please. So I guess the next steps, schedule an advising appointment if you want with the Graduate Student Services. I can put my email in the chat. Ming is going to take over some of this, and I rambled on, but maybe I'll leave it at that, and just leave you with my email in the chat. You're more than welcome to follow up with me afterwards.
Hi, thank you, Ken, and hi, everyone. My name is Meng, and nice to meet you all. I'm the admission coordinators for the MSFM program, and my role is to assist you in all your application processes. So Ken actually gave a super good overview of the application requirements and how to apply already. And just something I want to add here is, firstly, the March 15th deadline. It is a deadline for both your application submission as well as all the references and documents. So here I strongly encourage you to prepare ahead of time, submit ahead of time, so that not only you're able to submit everything, but also you're leaving sufficient room for your referees to submit their part of assessment for you. And the second thing I want to highlight in the application procedure is the officiality of the documents, especially for your references, where when you put in your reference information, please make sure they are using the institution email. Any generic email such as Gmail and Hotmail, unfortunately, will not be recognized as acceptable email address, and that will make you run into issues. And secondly, when you're submitting anything by paper, for example, transcripts, make sure they are either a scan of official transcript or directly coming from the institution. So for example, a screenshot of your grade summary from your student center from your university, that is not considered official. And last thing I want to add here is for language score, we actually have a higher language requirement than the general UBC graduate studies requirement. So I would strongly suggest you to check out our website for detailed application requirement, and also to be mindful of what is required at a forestry program versus what is required at university level. I will share all the links in the chat, and I'll pass it back to Shane for wrap up.
Thanks, Mung, and thank you, Ken, for that great overview. I realized something that I forgot to do at the beginning was make sure that we had a proper introduction to all of our panelists, because we've got 3 panelists here today. And I think it'd be great now just for you to meet them and hear a bit more about their background, as well as their role within the program. So maybe, Harry, would you like to jump in at this point and tell us a bit more about yourself?
Oh, thank you, Shane. So welcome, everybody. I'm very happy to see quite a few Americans joining us. I'm the director of the program. I'm also an associate professor. My background is forest policy and economics, so I teach those courses in the program. I think Ken's done a really nice job of sort of laying out what's involved. I think that from my perspective, one of the things I want to emphasize to you is, we're a small faculty. It's very personable and very personalized. So if you do have any questions, don't stress if you're worried about having the right courses. You can email Ken, you can email Ming. We oftentimes let people make up courses if they feel like we're missing, like for example, an ecology course. We have an economist actually in the program this year. I would suggest that one of the things that I think is sort of common throughout all the people that have taken the program is, they love forests, they love forestry. And this is a course that gets you out there, gets you out in the field, looking at all the forests and some of the diversity we have in BC, and it kind of exposes you, I think, to, there's a lot of different things we're doing in BC, and sort of a fascinating time to kind of join us as we go through a transition. You may end up working for First Nations, you may end up working for government, you may end up working for community forest or for a firm. So with that, I look forward, and I think, did you want to kind of, Shane, anybody else?
Yeah, well, I was going to ask Ken if he could come back in and just tell us a bit more about your sort of professional forestry background as well.
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to. Thanks, Shane. So yeah, I'm, as I mentioned, I'm a registered professional forester with the ABCFP. Have been for a number of years now. I've been a lecturer and coordinator in this program for, well, almost 2 years now, about a year and a half. Prior to that, I worked as a research manager and a research scientist at FP Innovations, which is a nonprofit forest research institute based here in Vancouver and also in Montreal in Quebec. My academic background is in windthrow modeling and silviculture. And what I've done in the course of my trials that I worked at FP Innovations was a lot of operations trials in measuring machine productivity, but also looking at solutions to harvesting on soft ground to adapt to climate change, commercial thinning, that sort of thing.
Excellent. Thank you for those intros and telling us a bit more about your background and your roles in the program. Now we've had the program overview, it's time for us to answer your questions, and I can see we've had some questions in to the Q&A already. So let's tackle those. Andre had a couple of questions. First question really about software that I use for a couple of programs. A couple of courses within the program. Ken, would you be able to speak to the software that's used?
For sure, yeah. So the 556 course, we use models such as TIPSI, which stands for Table Interpolation Program for Stand Yields. It's basically interpolates output from the TAS, which is the tree and stand simulator. There is also opportunity to work with other growth and that is a growth and yield model, TAS. There's other growth and yield models that you would have the opportunity to use, such as FBS-BC, which is a newly revamped version of FBS and prognosis. It's a growth and yield model. For GIS, we have ArcGIS Pro. We have the full suite of software and programs that are installed on laptops that are given to each student, including R, Python. Anyway, the list goes on. I'd be happy to expand on that if you have a follow-up question. Your second question there, as a graduate, do I get the PG? I assume that's related to a work permit. I don't know.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, the post. Yeah, it stands for the
Postgraduate work
postgraduate
permit, yes.
work permit. Yeah.
So the program is 10 months. I'm not an expert in immigration, so we do have an international student organization, international student society or organization here on campus that can give you the most current information. But my understanding is that you are eligible for a work permit for as long as you're in the program, which is 10 months, which gets you started.
Yeah, that's right. So typically, you'd get a 1 year work permit upon finishing the program, and it's relatively easy to transfer your student visa into a work visa, which will allow you then to apply for any role in Canada. Many of our graduates at UBC do stay in Canada after they've graduated, because compared to other countries, it is I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's certainly much easier to obtain the postgraduate work permit, and then also extend that permit, if you're in a role within an organization in Canada. I will just dig up the links to our international office that Ken mentioned, and I'll post those into the chat shortly as well. But I hope that answered your questions. Another question here from Aisha. I hope I pronounced that right. Harry, maybe you could answer this one if you didn't mind. What is the general outlook of the industry long term, as I'm seeing some of the mills are shutting down here in BC?
Thanks, Shane. So we're coming off a period when we had higher harvest levels accelerated with the impact of the mountain pine beetle and other kind of events over the last few years. So right now, we're kind of coming back to kind of something that's built around a more sustainable outlook, Ishi. So I would say that we're going to flatten out. We're still not clear yet where that flattening out is going to take place. We could come down a little bit more because we're debating kind of increased protection for things like old growth. So that said, what seems to counterbalance that from the industry side is we're also going through kind of a wave of retirements. And so pretty much, and I think Ken would attest to this, even though the industry may be shrinking, demand is still growing for people to replace people that are retiring, whether it's in industry, whether it's in government. And we're sort of having new folks, First Nations, Indigenous groups kind of enter the sector here. And so there's opportunities there. And the other thing I would simply note, that's just in BC. You go through the program, you have opportunities to go work in the States where, you need a professional forester designation, elsewhere in Canada. So, it's a bigger world than just BC, even though there's a lot of, I think, opportunity here still.
Excellent. That's great. Thanks, Harry. Just seeing what else. Question here from Jacob. Could you talk about the opportunities for learning and mentorship in prescribed fire management as part of the program?
Can Ken and I kind of tag team on this one?
Go for it. That would be great.
All right. So I think I'll start off with, we talk about fire in the program and some of it. We don't have a particularly fire. We have some, Lori Daniels, who does fire ecology in an active research program. I think the opportunity for you would be, there's flexibility in a program to do directed studies, to take electives where you can kind of go and specialize and find a professor or somebody to work on this or take courses in that area. So my sense would be that's where the opportunity would be to do that. From a more institutional perspective, this is probably a growth area as we're trying to increase the amount of prescribed burning we're doing in BC, but it's still early days for that. So I guess that would sort of, I don't know, Ken, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you've hit it pretty well right. The directed study would be the best place to explore that. We can not only with other faculty, but other professionals in the field. We had a student last year who was interested in fire, and that's exactly what we did. We linked him up with a local employer who has done a vast amount of fire research and fire treatments around communities. And he did his directed study with that employer, and I believe is now working for BC Wildfire Service. As you mentioned, with traditional burning and whatnot, there's probably going to be more of a push for that and a push for more intensive management. And to add to that, a previous question about, you know, the perceived, well, the industry is getting smaller, yes, but historically we've had far fewer foresters managing much larger pieces of land. And the way forest management seems to be going is that it's going to require the expertise of more foresters on smaller pieces of land to do more complex type prescriptions.
Excellent. And really interesting to hear about that sort of, you know, those networking opportunities in the program. Like, it seems like you're able to connect students with industry, and there's a good network to be found in the program.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's one of the strengths. And in this second term, I didn't speak to it specifically, but the second term is a landscape level forest land management course. It's a large 9-credit course, which the focus is a capstone project developing a landscape level plan, which the students defend, but it's delivered in modules. And the reason we do that is to maximize flexibility, to be able to bring topical, relevant speakers who are leaders in their field, as well as connect students with employers. I think something that hasn't been spoken to much, and I'm glad you brought it up, Shane, is the really the support. Well, Harry spoke to it a bit. We're here to support you. We're here to help you with your job searches and your CV development and resume writing and that sort of thing, and to prepare you for interviews if and when you get them.
Excellent. That's great. Okay, next question here from Colby. I don't know if you can see this, Harry, but Colby believes he met you at Dog Creek. But Colby's question is about scholarships. I mean, maybe you could speak broadly about if there are any scholarship opportunities, but also, are there many students in the program on the Pacific Leaders Plan as BC public servants? Would either of you know about that?
Well, first, Colby, nice to hear from you again. For those of you that aren't familiar, I met Colby. Dog Creek's a First Nations community up along the banks of the Fraser River. Colby, my immediate answer is no, I'm not familiar with it. I would like to know more about it. I do know, in talking with people within the provincial government, there is an interest in finding out what can be done to support people becoming professional foresters. And so perhaps if you could follow up with myself and Ken and Meng, we can kind of talk more about that. As far as I know, we haven't had anybody come through the program like that yet. At the same time, we have a lot of people now working at more senior levels in the provincial government. So maybe that's something that we could mutually kind of learn more about that might be beneficial for people that want to go in that direction.
Great. A question here from Kaitan, who says, I'm from a mechatronics engineering background. I had biology chemistry during my schooling in India. I've been working in the paper industry for the last 6 years, but I want to start my forestry career. I know it's difficult for us to talk about individual cases like this, but broadly speaking, would Kaitan be eligible? And maybe you could talk more broadly about the backgrounds of some of the people who've joined the program.
Ken, I think, do you want to take this one?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, I mean, engineering is a very relevant discipline and profession that can be adapted to forestry. There are a lot of transferable skills. You know, without looking at the transcript directly. I mean, certainly I mentioned biology, chemistry as two of the sciences that are required as part of undergrad to get into the program. There are other courses in stats and economics, ecology ideally, but we do have, I did mention that we do have this year a mechanical engineer, somebody who went through their mechanical engineering in the program, another person who was in chemical engineering. So certainly it sets you up very well for the program.
Question here from Sarah. Is traditional ecological knowledge incorporated as part of the students' learning? Who'd like to start on that one?
Well, I think, Ken, I think William will, well, actually, yes, I think with the proposed changes to the curriculum, that's going to be part of something that we have other professional programs within the Faculty of Forestry, and that's going to be something that gets picked up, I think, within that diverse knowledge course that's now going to be taught next year. As well, I think it gets picked up depending on this year, the landscape level plan was working with the Elgacho First Nation. So that comes through when you're kind of out there in the ground working with people there. And I think it will also come up in the, we have somebody that's going to be speaking on First Nations governance issues, which involves how do you deal with issues of knowledge and what's the appropriate way to, you know, respect that and use that. So I'd say it's kind of woven in throughout there, Sarah, you know.
If I could add to that too, it's that is very intentional to have First Nations and Indigenous knowledge woven throughout the program. So, for example, this year we started the very first guest speaker that we had met us out at Kootenai Pass out near Nelson there, Gary Merkel, to give us an introduction to a welcome and an introduction to the area, and an introduction to Aboriginal perspectives, First Nations perspectives as they enter the program. As we go through the program, the Malcolm Knapp Research Forest, where we do the site level plan, is on Katzie First Nation territory. We met with them the first day that we were out there before the students started working on their site level plans. And we also have additional speakers who come in from Indigenous backgrounds to speak to things like invasive species, ecological restoration, and more. We have Indigenous faculty who have contributed to the diverse knowledge systems courses that Harry referenced. So it is very intentional in the program.
Great, thanks for those answers. Another question here from Tan. Can we say after the completion of the program, as the graduate has knowledge about forestry, could they privately grow trees to supply the paper and pulp industry? Have you got experience of that, of those linkages of students kind of going into that space?
We have we have people that, I'm trying to think, there's a online certificate that looks at intensively or fast growing plantations, which is what I think we're talking about. So that's not directly something that you would get because we're talking about how people work and manage kind of in our forests here in British Columbia, which tend to be a slower growing and a kind of short rotation woods used in pulp paper industry. That said, similar to what Jacob was asking about the prescribed fire management, it is something that you could learn about through a directed study. And there's places where you could do it here, but I wouldn't say that's one of the primary focuses of the program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good to know. That's great. Okay, another question here from Phil. He says, I didn't take chemistry and stat courses in my undergrad. where can I take these courses prior to applying? Can I take them at local colleges? I guess first of all, like, are they sort of strong prerequisites? Or would you recommend that people have those courses on their transcripts before they apply?
Maybe I can take this one. The stats course, I think, is necessary. There's lots of those online that you can take. I see also, Phil, that you have the comment that you did the urban forestry program. I'm not sure whether that's UBC or elsewhere. It would be interesting to know whether they're core science courses you took. Not everybody you don't necessarily need chem, but if you have, physics or an earth science or soils, even better course, that would be appropriate. But it does, beyond that, I can't really comment on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and that could be, one that you follow up with Mung, like about booking an advising appointment could be a good idea, or emailing us. You can see the email in the chat as well for that question too. For those more individual cases, we're happy to take a look at them with you and give you some advice. So do email us and do book an advising appointment. Okay, excellent. Okay, so okay, great. So Phil did the UBC one, but I think you answered that question. Thanks, Ken. So do let us know if you've got any more questions. We're around for like another 15 minutes or so, so let us know any more questions if you have them. I'm also going to just pull a couple of questions from the registration. So I know some of you submitted questions as part of the registration for this event. One question that came up a couple of times was around how faculty evaluate applications. So I know we've touched on this already, but I'd be grateful if you could speak a little bit about what you look for in a strong application, particularly in terms of the undergraduate experience. What are some things that stand out or that you look for in a strong applicant?
Sure, I can take this one. I mentioned that letter of intent. The letter of intent is really important because that really demonstrates what your passion is and why you want to take forestry. So often beyond that letter of intent, some good strong references that will validate whatever is in your letter of intent and your CV. In the CV, typically looking for an interest in the outdoors, whether that be at work or recreationally. Ideally, some work in the outdoors, some experience. We have quite a few tree planters in this year's class. Some have worked for consultants doing cruising and layout, and just they're here to get their qualifications to get their RPF. So certainly an expressed interest in becoming an RPF. It's not absolutely necessary, but just some strong reasons why you're interested in forestry and why you want to go into it. Certainly the academics are required. The minimum is B+, but if you had to work like heck to get your B+, I think that's a much stronger applicant than somebody who kind of coasted through with a 95% average and doesn't have any experience or expressed interest in forestry.
Yeah, that's really insightful. Thanks, Ken. Just on the RPF point, we did have a question in asking, does this program allow me to apply to become an RPF as an ASFIT or a FIT? So sorry, I don't know all of those acronyms, but is this program a pathway to those?
I know FIT and ASFIT, but I missed the first part. It was
RPF. Yeah.
Oh, RPF. Yes, absolutely. So as I mentioned, it's the program is accredited with now the body that does the accreditation is actually the CFAB, the Canadian Forestry Accreditation Board. They accredit the program, and in the States, the Society of American Foresters accredit the program. The profession is administered on a provincial basis. So as an allied science or ASFIT, that is somebody who comes in with a non-accredited degree. They will go through the Canadian Forestry Accreditation Board. They determine what their gaps are and then send it to the provincial bodies to determine what's required to address those gaps. And then they can, once they've addressed those, then they can proceed with their internship, which includes 6 professional modules. If you're in BC, you do 6 modules with the Association of BC Forest Professionals. And then each province has its own process once you've completed an accredited program or become an FIT.
So,
and then you become an RPF.
Yeah, so Jen, again, for those of you, if not everybody's familiar with what Ken was speaking about, one of the benefits or strengths of the program, I guess, is you meet the qualifications to be a professional forester. If you want to practice forestry in Canada, and there are certain things that are restricted to professional foresters, you need to have those credentials. And this program helps you acquire those credentials. It's a bit different down in the States. Some states require it, others don't. But for those of you, not you Americans, are thinking about coming up here, but there's any Canadians about thinking going down to the States, there's actually, it's fairly straightforward to take these credentials and go work in a place like California where they're desperately looking for people with the kind of qualifications you'd have. So, and then just because you go through the program doesn't necessarily mean that you need to become an RPF. I mean, there's other benefits and opportunities there, but it is definitely one of the a motivating factor for many of the people that do come through.
So in Canada, it's nationally, there's a national standard. In the States, the certified foresters, it's a little bit more patchwork. It's not always mandatory. Whereas in Canada, to call yourself a professional forester, you need to be an RPF and go through the process. In the States, California is about the closest one that has a similar process. I believe Maine, Colorado, and some other state, there's a bit of a patchwork and it varies depending on what state you're in.
Excellent. That's really, really insightful. Thanks both for those answers. A question here from Tolu, who says they have a bachelor's degree in agronomy and a master's degree in agroforestry. Tolu's a lecturer with 10 years experience and wondering if the program can help them acquire more knowledge in forestry. Could it help them proceed to a PhD and also funding? Harry, what do you think on this?
Well, regretfully, Tolu, I would say that this is probably not the best way to go about it. I mean, first of all, this is an intense 1-year program where, you know, as an international student, unless, you know, you have to pay the tuition, it's not something that automatically, like a research master's, could lead into a PhD. We have had the odd student do it, but that's a different path. If that's where your interest is, you're better off to try either trying to find somebody that's looking for PhD students. And yeah, that's, I guess, would be the honest answer.
Yeah, I think that's it's really important that you explain that. And Tolu, what I'd recommend is there are some really great PhD opportunities at UBC and at other institutions. So I'd recommend you check out our grad.ubc.ca website, and you can actually filter and search for PhD programs across the university. And also, you know, we can't really go into it today, but I'd recommend you download our application guide, which I'll post a link to in a couple of minutes. But the application guide is a much more general guide to applying to grad school, and it gives advice on applying to PhD programs. So I'd recommend you take a look at that. And I think that would be helpful to you. Okay, great. Let's see. A question here from David. Other than the previously mentioned change in staffing with retirements occurring and reduction in harvest after the recent larger MPB salvage logging operations in BC, what do you think will be some other future challenges for foresters? So yeah, not really so much program related, but Ken, would you be happy to try and answer that one?
Sure, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do see that, you know, going forward, there is, you know, a decline in harvest, which will exist for probably about 30, 40 years before it stabilizes, maybe rises a little bit. But meanwhile, the capacity in the industry will adjust. I mean, the capacity in the industry was increased to accommodate that mountain pine beetle salvage. And it was known, we knew 10 years ago that this was going to happen at this time. And it's just a matter of adjusting to those changing conditions. Forestry has a long history in BC and has always adjusted to those changing conditions. And I think one of the other challenges that I see going forward is, you know, we don't necessarily have the luxury of you know, large, you know, old growth forests to rely on or anything like that. We're going to have to make more with less. And technology is improving to try and do that, but it is developing. So you're really on the cusp of, you know, a new way of doing forestry, in my opinion, and that it will include doing more creative things on the landscape to manage for forest resiliency to fire and insects, learn from indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, to learn from what they have done for millennia and do things a little bit different. The challenge, of course, will be as we move through those changes, there's going to be, it's going to take some time, and it's going to take some patience, and it's going to take some creativity to do more with less. But I do think that it is possible.
Thanks, Ken. Great questions, everyone. Let us know if you've got any final questions. Another question that came in as part of the registration was asking if there's any plans to deliver this program online in the future. Is that a possibility?
At this point, we have, I think that has not come up. I think that, speaking for myself, I think the value of the program is the fact that it is in person. There is one of the things that the program sort of relies on is developing a strong sense of a cohort for each year. Because many of the, as Ken was talking about, these sort of site level plans and landscape level plans are done in small teams or groups. And that's deliberate. I think it's deliberate in part because, you know, that's the way the world is increasingly working. So you learn how to work effectively in groups. And part of it is, honestly, this is about forestry. I mean, this is for people that are, at some point, you're going to be out in the forest. You need to see it, you need to experience, you need to understand it if you're going to be an effective forester. Ken, anything you want to add to that?
No, I agree with everything you said there, Harry. And I think the value of this program is in the experiential learning. And it's very difficult to achieve that kind of experiential learning you know, through Zoom or remotely. It needs that engagement. And in fact, during the pandemic, when all the other courses and programs were online at UBC, this program remained in person. And we were, it was set up as basically a quarantined or isolated cohort out at the research forest to complete their project work. And it was certainly a different experience, but it still maintained that experiential learning, which is critical, I think, to the program.
Yeah, and that's amazing that you kept going through the pandemic. That's excellent that you did that. Yeah, could you? I wanted to ask as well. Like, could you just talk a little bit more about, you know, I guess, you know, how you assess students, and that balance between, you know, individual work and group work. Like, it seems like this is a program where you will be working in groups quite a lot.
Yeah, for sure. So the group projects are the report for the site level and the landscape level plans. Those are assessed as a group mark. It's slightly less for the site level plan. I believe it amounts to about 40% of the course mark. In the landscape level course, it amounts to, if you combine the report and the defense, it's 50%. I think the group mark is also intentional because it prepares you for working in multidisciplinary teams out in the field. Like the students coming into the program are often coming from many different backgrounds, both from a professional aspect and even a cultural aspect. And you know, where you learn how to work together is right here. So that group mark is very important. Of course, there are you know, individual assignments and tests to assess you individually.
Shane, perhaps we may get a chance to speak to this later, but I think one of the things that we had discussed was if people that are interested in the program would like to talk to either current students or former students, I think we have a lot of happy alumni, but you know, we'd be more than happy to put you in touch with to give you their own perspective, including even questions like that.
Yeah, that's excellent. What's the best way to do that? Should they email each of you or email Mung?
I think probably Ken, do you want to try and
Yeah, you can email me. Yeah, you can email me and I'll set that up.
That's really excellent. And I will say, you know, that's quite uncommon. Like a lot of programs can't facilitate that. So it's really great that we have faculty like Ken and Harry that are able to do that and introduce you to people from the program. And that's just such an amazing way to really understand the workings of a program, to speak to someone who's been through it and experienced it. So yeah, that's great that can happen. I'm just going to post into the chat as well, just the next steps that were in the slide, just so you have the link to the website, and also you can sign up for the mailing list as well. So that's another recommendation. So we're coming towards the end of the session now. Have we missed anything, Harry or Ken? Is there anything else you want to mention before we wrap things up?
I think the only thing I was thinking about this, which for some of you, you know, obviously some of the people on the phone call or on this Zoom session have some familiarity with BC or with forestry, or may have run into somebody that's gone through the program. It is from my own personal perspective, there's a lot of camaraderie both within the program each year, and you are joining this sort of cohort. We'll have 11 years of students out there. As Ken said, it's a very forestry in Canada and BC is both big enough to accommodate a whole range of different possibilities, but small enough that we can by joining the program, you kind of join that network. And I think that's really something I've enjoyed in the time I've been involved with it. So something you can look forward to if that's important to you.
Yeah, and if I could, I'll maybe just one final thought on that too is, while the program is in BC and our lab, our classroom is the forest, which reinforces why we need to do it in person. The nearest forest, of course, is BC, and that's the example we have to work with. But the principles and the topics that we teach can be applied, and the questions that we train foresters to ask, that no matter where they are in the world, you come into a forest asking the same kind of questions. You know, what are your objectives? What is the ecosystem? What are the driving factors of that ecosystem? And how do you best manage it? These principles that you learn in the program can be applied no matter what forest in the world you go to. And in my experience going to workshops, whether that be you know, New Zealand, Australia, Europe, all foresters are really the same. It's a small community, and it's a fun community to be part of.
Great. And there was this one more question here from Sarah about how do referees submit their references? And Mung, do you want to jump in on this?
Yes, for sure. So at the time of application, you'll be asked to put in referee information, where you'll provide their institutional emails. And once your application is submitted, your referees will receive a unique link into their email box where they can click and fill in the forms. And generally speaking, all the references will come in a form, but sometimes some of the referees will prefer to send a letter instead of form, and they have the option to upload that. And if there's any issue with submitting the reference online, there's also an option and instruction included in the link to tell the referees how to mail the references to us. And just to make sure, if you're mailing the references, it is in a sealed, hopefully institutional envelope, and it is sent directly to us.
Thanks, Mung, for that clarification. And yeah, references are super important. So make sure you reach out to your referees early, because getting good references will be really helpful in your application. Okay, great. So I think we've covered off all of your questions. Thank you all for your questions today. I think we'll wrap things up now as it's just after 10:30 here in Vancouver. Ken and Harry, thanks so much for your time today. Did you have any final words or thoughts before we wrap things up?
Well, no, thank you, Shane. Thank you, Meng. Thank you, Natasha, who was silent on the call, but making sure everything works behind the scenes. If this feels like the right program for you, we look forward to seeing you next year. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you all. And thank you for all of you who attended and asked the questions, and hopefully see some of you here soon. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.